Ladies and gentlemen, 2025 is going to be a big year for the UFC, I think, in terms of retirements, because there's a lot of guys at the top of their divisions who could possibly call it a day, and some old heads who were good back in the day, I think, are going to hang up the gloves. So I'm going to count down some fighters I think will retire in 2025. I'm going to go through this completely unscripted, just my personal opinion, why I think they'll retire, maybe who I think they'll retire against. And I'm going to start it off with a pretty obvious one, a guy who has said he's going to retire in his next fight. The Diamond, Dustin Poirier. Yeah, I think his next one's going to be his last one. He said it, no matter who it's against. I'll tell you who I think it's going to be against in a minute, but Dustin, you can look at his last three fights. He's got a win in there, a win over BSD, which was a good win. You know, BSD was pretty scary. He knocked him out. He got a title shot off it and looked pretty good against Islam. He gave him his toughest fight at lightweight. But he's not going to get another title shot. That was probably his last chance to gain lightweight gold. Depending on who it's against, there's a lot of talk about a trilogy with Gaethje. I don't know. There's been negotiations of having Gaethje fight Hooker on UFC 313. I think that's a better fight to make for the both of them. For the perfect send-off, I'm saying it right now. International Fight Week in July. Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway 3 for the BMF title. I think that's a great send-off. Even if he wins or loses, that's guaranteed violence. He gives the fans one last good fight before he hangs them up. And I think it makes sense for Max too. He says he wants to move up to lightweight. I thought when he moved up, maybe Charles for the BMF, but it looks like Charles is going to be fighting for the title next. So screw it. Give Poirier another shot at the BMF. Give him a chance to retire with at least one belt, even if it is the BMF. I don't care. Dustin Poirier, I think, though, will retire. Next up, Dominic Cruz. A guy who 99% of the MMA world probably thought was already retired. I think he should already be retired. But he's not. He said he's going to come back for one more retirement fight in 2025. His last fight was a loss to Marlon Chito Vera, in a fight he was winning, to be fair, but he was knocked out brutally. That was 2 years ago now. It was 2 years the last time we saw Dominic Cruz in a UFC octagon. I think the only fight that makes sense for this guy, Dominic Cruz versus Jose Aldo, legacy fight, early 2025, I say. Maybe both of them can retire. I don't really see Aldo calling it a day. After that fight, I can see him staying on. I mean, he did come back from retirement and fought two killers. Give him an old man at least. But yeah, I think it's the only fight that Cruz deserves. I don't think we should be feeding Cruz to someone that's just going to be entering the rankings, like a Peyton Talbot or someone like that. I don't want him to get brutally KO'd again. I can't be watching that. But yeah, that's the two easy ones out of the way. Those are the two guys that said they're going to retire next year, and their next one will be their last one. Next up, Henry Cejudo. I've made the size of the picture realistic as well. This one's a little bit off it. You know, I don't know with this guy. He came back after 3 years off a stupid retirement in the first place after he beat Dominic Cruz, after he finished Dominic Cruz. Came back, had a really good fight with Aljo for the belt. Arguably won, looked really good after 3 years off, and then gets absolutely manhandled by Marab, who's obviously now the champ. The only two fights that make sense for Henry now, in my opinion, is either Chito or Song Yadong. Anyone else, I think, doesn't make much sense for the Triple C. I think those are both two winnable fights as well. Maybe Chito is the easier one. If he loses, I can definitely see him hanging it up for a second time. If he does win, I can definitely see him being the type of guy I think he's still good enough to compete, even though he's not, even though he's 37 fucking years old at bantamweight. But you never know with Henry Cejudo, bro. But yeah, I personally believe that Henry will lose to Marlon Vera or Song Yadong and retire next year. This one, I don't even know, honestly. And that's not even his last 3 fights. This is to prove a point. I've put his last 8 fights to prove a point. Tony El Cucuy Ferguson not only should retire in 2025, but has to retire in 2025. He has to. There's no excuse. You've lost 8 fights in a row. You just got submitted in the first round to Michael Chiesa. What other signal do you need? What other signal? I don't even need to think he needs to fight again to retire. He should have retired after Chiesa. He half retired. Half retired, bro. He put one glove down. Put the other one down in your next one. You have to. You have to put the other one down. No matter who he fights. I don't care. Clay Guida. A rematch with Cowboy if he comes back. One of the two actually does make sense. And if he loses them, that is when you have to call it a day. Tony Ferguson. Even if he wins, I can still see him kicking around. It's similar with Cejudo. I can see him, if he beats whoever's next, he'll be like, oh, I won. Let's have another one. No, you shouldn't have another one. Retire on a high. You're good. It's over. Tony, please. We don't want you to have worse CTE than Tito. And that is something you don't want to achieve. Next up, Jared Cannonier. This one actually is another easy one, but he hasn't said he's going to retire, but I can sense it. I can sense it. Jared Cannonier has lost his last 2 fights to young and hungry contenders. He's getting fed to these guys like Kyle Borralho and Nasruddin Imavov. The Imavov fight obviously was a bit dodgy because it was a really early stoppage, but Kyle basically KO'd him. He's actually the only fighter on this list to actually have a fight booked. He's fighting Gregory Rodriguez Robocop on the main event of an Apex fight night in February. I think if he loses that, which I actually think he will, he's going to call it a day. He's 40 years old, although he may not look it. He is old. He's 40. He's getting fed to another young prospect. It has to be it. It has to be it for Jared. He's not going to be fighting for the title. He's not going to be beating anyone at the top anymore. He's accomplished what he can. He's come far from a blob at heavyweight to now a really, really good looking middleweight, but it's time to call it a day, Jared. It's over. And this last one, it's going to be a little bit of a curveball. I've had to throw one in that's going to get some interaction. Alexander Volkanovski is going to retire next year. Here's what I think is going to happen. He is going to rematch to Poirier for the belt, maybe in June or even August, because Ilya is that inactive. That gives him enough time to recover. It's already been a year since he last fought. He's going to get brutally KO'd again, realize he's not good enough to fight for the featherweight title because he's already lost to Ilya twice. He's not going to sit and gatekeep the division because he's fucking 36 years old. So, and he can't move up to lightweight either because he's already lost twice to the champ. And then again, what's the point in just having fun fights? Retire. You've accomplished everything. You've cemented yourself as the featherweight GOAT, in my opinion. You've beat Max Holloway 3 times. You beat Jose Aldo, Brian Ortega, Yair Rodriguez, Korean Zombie. The list just goes on and on and on. Arguably beat Islam Makhachev. There's no point in you to fight anymore. Call it a day. Call it a day, Volk. You've done it. You've accomplished what you can. If you lose to Poirier, call it a day. And that's it. That's 6 fighters who I believe are going to retire in 2025. Let me know if I missed out any. I probably have. There's some in my head that I have missed out. Honorable mentions like, Anthony Smith, who also half retired this year. He's probably going to retire too. I haven't even given him his own slide because I don't think he deserves it, quite frankly. But yeah, the video is finished. You can click off now.